When Legends Die, Chapter 24. Is 14 miles to Blanco and trading post and post office halfway home. They rode at a lope the first 5 miles, and Red kept watching the road behind them. Then, since nobody was following them, they slowed to a trot, and Red began gloating over the way he had outsmarted the Aztec betting crowd. He boasted, and he laughed, he boasted again. Tom paid little attention. He was still living the afternoon. He could have ridden the black in the finals. He knew that. He could have ridden it clear and clean and been champion, taken top purse money. But Red ordered him to lose, and he made that one mistake, made it deliberately, and got thrown. Then he rode the bay, which was a meaner horse than the black, a worse bucker. He rode it to a finish, rode it to death. He still saw the bloody foam, heard the cough and the final spurt of blood, the thud of its head on the ground, and he felt queasy. He looked at Red, heard his braggart voice and jeering laugh, and remembered the way he had gouged with his spurs, punishing not the horse, but something else, something that Red Dillon represented. He had punished it, gouged and fought and mastered it, rode the horse to death. And Red Dillon's voice and grating laughter were still right here beside him. He began to feel queasy again and wished Red would shut up. He was light-headed and sweating. Red sensed something wrong. He turned and looked at Tom and asked, "What's the matter with you?" Tom shook his head and said, "Nothing," and knew he was going to be sick. He stopped his horse, got off, and fell to his knees and began to retch. Red grinned. "You're kind of shook up, I guess. Feel better now?" Tom got to his feet and stood, holding to the saddle, till his head began to clear. Finally he mounted again. They rode on, and Red said, "I'll stop at Blanco and get a bottle of tonic. That'll settle your guts." He laughed. Blanco was only a couple of miles ahead. They rode up to the store, and Tom waited while Red went in. He came back with 3 bottles, undid his bedroll, and stowed 2 of them inside. Then he opened the 3rd bottle and took a long drink from it. He wiped the neck on his sleeve and handed it to Tom. "Take a good swig. Clean the dust out of your throat." Tom took a mouthful, swallowed twice, and felt the burn of the liquor all the way to his stomach before he even tasted it. He took another mouthful, handed the bottle back to Red, and shivered as he swallowed again. It burned all the way down, then seemed to fume back and fill his head. Red took another long drink, corked the bottle, and got on his horse. They started on home. Tom's head began to reel. He swayed in the saddle, had to hold on to the pommel. Red laughed at him. "Hold tight, Tom. Don't start flapping your wings, or you'll fly right out of the saddle. Ain't used to wings, I guess, are you? Feel better now?" "No." Red uncorked the bottle, took another drink. "You will." He offered the bottle to Tom again. Tom shook his head and wondered why it didn't seem to be fastened to his neck. His body was down there somewhere, and it didn't ache any more, but his head was floating all by itself. Then he felt his body swaying and ordered his hands to grab the saddle and hold on. They got the order and obeyed. Then he ordered his eyes to look at his horse's ears and stop his head from spinning. His eyes looked, but the horse had 4 ears. Why? It didn't matter. He closed his eyes and let his head spin, and his hands gripped the saddle. Darkness came, the horses plodded homeward. Tom slept, his hands still gripping the saddle, his chin on his chest. Red talked to himself, laughed from time to time. He began to sing. Tom woke up, almost fell out of the saddle, recovered, and felt the queasiness again. Red's toneless singing rasped at his ears. "Shut up!" Tom shouted, and his own voice echoed in his ears. "Shut your damn big mouth!" Red laughed and went on singing, and Tom was asleep again. It was almost midnight when the horses picked their way down the trail along the bluff and crossed to the barn. Tom wakened and wondered where he was. The horses stopped. Red bellowed, "Mio, Mio, come here, you damn old chili eater." A light appeared in the house. The door opened, and Mio appeared, lantern in hand. He came to the barn, and Red said, "Mio, you old chili eater, I took 'em." His words were slurred thick. He laughed. "Put the horses away. We got to celebrate." He waved the bottle, now empty, and dismounted. Mio steadied him, or he would have fallen. Red tilted up the bottle and said, "All gone. Dead soldier," and tossed it aside. He tried to untie his bedroll. Mio undid it for him, got it over his shoulder, and Red started to the cabin, weaving as he went. Tom dismounted carefully, each motion deliberate. His head still swam, and he wasn't sure of his feet. He held to the saddle until he had his equilibrium, then took off his bedroll, put it on the ground, and loosened the latigos. He almost fell as he pulled the saddle off, but he carried it to the barn and got it onto the pole where it belonged. I'll finish, Mio said. Go get some coffee. Thomas almost fell as he leaned over to pick up his bedroll, but he got it into his arms and carried it to the cabin. Red was sprawled in his bunk, already asleep. Tom put the bedroll on the foot of his own bunk, went to the hearth, and poured a cupful of hot black coffee. He sat down at the table, the cup in his hands, and tried to drink. He burned his lips, but couldn't feel the scald inside his mouth. His whole gullet, was numb. He set the cup down and was sitting there, staring at it when Mio came in. Mio glanced at Red, then came to the table. He filled a bowl with beans and chili, set it in front of Tom, and put a half-dozen cold tortillas beside it. Eat, he ordered. Put something in the belly. Tom had no hunger, but he rolled a tortilla and scooped up the beans, took a mouthful. It felt good, though he could hardly taste it. He scooped another mouthful from the bowl. You won, Mio said. Tom shook his head. I lost. Then you rode again? Yes. Tom wondered how Mio knew. I rode again. I rode a horse to death. Ah. Mio nodded. He glanced toward Red, snoring in his bunk, pointed with his chin. He won. Tom nodded. Mio went over to Red and went through his pockets. He took all the money he could find, counted it, then put back a few bills. He folded the rest of it carefully and thrust it into his own pocket. Then he came back to the fireplace and filled Tom's chili bowl again. Tom's head began to clear. He could taste the bite of the coffee, the flavor of the chili. Mio sat down opposite him with a cup of coffee. Tell me about it, he urged. Tom told him. Mio listened, nodding, sipping coffee, making no comment. At last he jerked his chin toward Red and said, Someday they will kill that one, or he will kill himself. It was an unemotional statement, his only comment. He finished his coffee. Tomorrow, he said, we will harvest the frijoles, you and I. Go to bed now.